I actually, dude, I I almost like feel like this would have been one of the best papers to start the series with, actually, because it's
It's a good
it's
paper.
it's it's a really good paper. Papineau, I've read a couple things by him at this point. He's a very good writer, and I mean, like, I think did I text this to you guys? Like, I do have skeptical questions, but they're coming from the position of like having read and liked the paper. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
And that's the best.
It's not like, I mean, I won't even like mention the IIT paper. Like, even the epiphenomenalism paper, like, a lot of my questions were just trying to understand the moves of the paper. You know what I mean? And it's always frustrating when you feel like you can't dig into, like, I don't know, kind of offering, like, some skeptical questions because you're like, I don't even know if I understand this. Like, I understand what's going on here to,
Yeah. Yeah.
to a good extent, Um, but yeah, so we should say we're talking about this paper called Mind the Gap by David Papineau. This is when he was at King's College London. I believe he's now at Columbia, if I remember correctly. He was, it's like I think I said to both of you, he was an early guest on the podcast. A pretty early guest. We talked about this sort of stuff, but obviously it was well before I did like any master's work, and so like I probably appeared as a real dullard to his eye. Because I was like very skeptical of materialism at that point. And I remember I had like read a few papers of his and had some like, what I thought were real like crack whip questions for him. But this was published in 1998 in Philosophical Perspectives, which is a good journal, a generalist journal. Um, so basically, I mean, I actually, one thing that I really appreciate is when people in the very beginning of their paper very clearly state what their thesis is. And he does this in the second paragraph in a way that you could just read it. You can just read it straightforward. He just starts by saying, like, I disagree with philosophers who maintain an explanatory gap between the material and the conscious. And he thinks that physicalism, which, as we've said, is the idea that the mind is like nothing more than the physical constituents of the brain or whatever, the physical substrate of consciousness is. So he says, I think that physicalism has no problem at all in explaining why conscious states go with brain states. This is because I think physicalism is best conceived as a thesis of identity between conscious properties and material properties, and identities need no explaining. So it's like that's just a nice way of like that's gonna be the paper. It's actually very nice when people spell it out like that. So do we want to do our terms of enjoyment? I gave this a 9. In terms of agreement, I I'm giving it a 5, but it's kind of a soft 5 because there's a lot in the paper that I'm like, this is compelling and I feel the pull, but I have skeptical questions and I'm not ready to agree yet. So that's why I kind of feel like it's not as though I'm actively disagreeing, but I'm certainly not actively agreeing either.
Yeah, I would say my scores for this one are actually almost identical. Um, I enjoyed reading the paper. Uh, just to be candid, I did read it last week, so
Hmm.
it's been a little while since I've picked it up. But I actually read it on the way to New York City. So,
Oh, nice.
so yeah, but yeah, so I'm kind of in a similar vein, like where like okay, I think I understand what this paper is going for, but certainly like I think it's not intuitive. Um, I think that he does kind of acknowledge that, so that's
Hmm.
we'll get into that. But like the conclusion, I'll say, is not intuitive.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and if the syllogism he puts forward seems good, so So we'll
Yeah.
have to get into that, but probably a 9 and a 5. So, Giffin.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar. Um, Between an 8 and a 9, I'd say. For enjoyment, I really did appreciate the fact that it was structured and like there were statements like the second paragraph where he articulates what he believes in and who he disagrees with.
Hmm.
Extremely appreciated. Now that seems like kind of a low baseline generally, but just from our experience
Yeah,
so
well,
far, it's like astonishing.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
and then agreement. I think a soft 5, I'd agree with as well.
I'm waiting for the day where one of us has some like unhinged like 4-9 where we're like, I it was all too right.
And I know that like Papineau, you've read more of him in the past and have said that like his writing is generally pretty clear. But the structure of a paper like this, can part of it just be chalked up to the fact that it was published in a generalist journal, like that it's so accessible to us in this case? Just because it seemed like I
A good
wasn't,
question.
it seemed like okay, yeah. I mean, if you're somebody not waist deep in theory of mind, but you read this journal
Mhm.
and you come across this paper, the idea is you'd be able to understand the paper without having to go into like, I mean, I don't know what we think of that.
No, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know that I'm in a perfect position to answer it, but what I will say is from my limited experience of like submitting to journals, I have not ever received feedback that would make me think that like the scope of the paper or sort of like the way it's laid out needed to be altered for like a generalist journal versus a specific one. That's not to say that it doesn't happen. You know what I mean? So maybe it's like a because I think like I mean maybe I'm completely like different than the field when it comes to this, but my experience of writing a paper is not writing one for a journal. I mean, I guess you might have the idea of like writing it and then your initial assumption is that you're going to submit it to like journals concentrating in that field. But with the acceptance rate of journals being what they are, I don't really think that people tend to write for a journal, if that makes sense. I think he's just a good writer. And the
Okay,
fact that it's a and the fact that it's a generalist journal is just, it's just where it happened to get accepted.
sure, okay,
From the journal's perspective, they might have viewed like the way it is written as a boon for their generalist journal, so like that might have
Mm-hmm.
informed their decision.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you have to kind of be a big name to just kind of like, yeah, I'm writing for this journal because I know I'm going to get it. I
Yeah,
guess you could
yeah.
still write for
Well,
like
I
the
mean,
category of journal.
mhm.
If the intention is to make something like you like this, you might have the intention of submitting to a series of generalist journals. I like the thesis, Adam. Um,
Yeah. Well, and also
yeah. I mean, I'm not
sometimes.
saying like which direction it goes. You know what I mean in terms of like the
Mhm.
journal
Content.
accepting the
Yeah.
paper because of the way it was structured versus writing it structured for a generalist journal. I'm just saying like it is just an interesting note that it
Yeah.
is a generalist journal and it's a very accessible paper.
Hmm.
So you know,
I wonder if what really might determine that is whether it's an invited contribution to like an edited volume or something
hmm.
versus something that does have to go through peer review. Um, because then, I mean, if you're writing, for some like, edited volume on, materialism, you can really take a lot for granted in how much you're going to
yeah,
kind of funnel
yeah.
in to the paper. But yeah, so basically, I mean, I think with this paper, I definitely want to not focus too much on because there were some things that I just agreed with that seemed like, okay, I'm not gonna, this is so, firm in terms of its grounding. Um, I mean, I guess in the broadest of strokes, I mean, like I said, he's arguing for a physicalist account of consciousness, and he's going to do so by saying that there is what's understood in the field as this explanatory gap this is something that Chalmers has kind of put like pressure on that we've talked about in the past is like, okay, well, there's this like intuitive like epistemic gap in just trying to put together an explanation of how we could possibly get from non-conscious operations of physical matter to creating a conscious experience. There just seems to be like Joseph Levine has coined this explanatory gap between these two things. And Papineau is going to say like, oh, if true, that would be like a very challenging thing for physicalists to overcome, but he's going to argue that there is no such gap, that this worry does not exist, or it's not like a robust worry, because basically he's going to make an identity claim that uh, conscious states, well, it's not, he doesn't use the word, yeah, conscious states are identical to their brain state. So, I mean, basically, he, do we want to talk about section two, the bad arguments for
I do.
physicalism? Okay,
I personally like when we go systematically through the paper.
okay,
I
that's fine.
like that because then it kind of builds up to some of the bigger claims that are made, so we're not kind of
Hmm.
shuffling backwards, So
Makes sense, makes sense. Yeah, so what he first does is the sections. I also like a lot of the section titles. I enjoyed. Um, he first discusses how not to argue for physicalism, and he moves through two arguments that he thinks are bad arguments before finally endorsing the third one. So the the first argument that he's going to reject is called the argument from intuition. So basically, I didn't have a whole lot of notes on this because I agreed with his rejection of it. But basically, the idea is that physicalism can be supported by intuition, which he says is implausible. Um, so I remember I liked the way he dispatched with this. He says,
let
for
me just read
example,
it. Okay,
yeah,
go
yeah,
ahead.
sure. Okay, yeah. So, for example, contemporary intuition attests that if we duplicate you molecule for molecule in a hollow copying machine, then your doppelganger will feel just like you. But this intuition does not suffice for anything worth calling physicalism. To see this, note that the holocopier thought experiment is consistent with epiphenomenalism. Perhaps your doppelganger feels like you simply because its brain states causally generate extra conscious states in just the same way that yours do. I take it that this kind of epiphenomenalism clearly doesn't amount to physicalism. He's going to say like, well, if we don't want to posit this kind of like extra I think he refers to it as like a causal dangler, this thing that exists but has no causal interactions with the world. And I mean, I think that that's right. Like so just to spell that point out a little bit more, like one potential way of arguing for physicalism is the idea that, well, if we copy you molecule for molecule, um, you will have an identical conscious experience to the one that you have now. This might seem to support the idea that, well, hey, look, we've copied the physical and we've copied the mental. So the mental must be physical, but as he points out, no, this is consistent with something like epiphenomenalism. It's even consistent with like very wacky forms of dualism, where like um, you know there's some like attachment method between like you know the free floating mental and how it like connects to the physical. So this is not a good argument for physicalism. He also rejects the
Well,
argument from realism. Oh yeah.
I'm gonna read the next part too because I just like this.
Hmm.
So rather, if we were thinking in these terms, we need to show that physical duplicates couldn't possibly be mentally different, or only this
Hmm.
would show that the mental was somehow constituted. Yeah, no, constituted. I mean, like, is there a typo there?
Constitute. It's
Yeah,
definitely constituted.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
typo.
Sorry about
It's so
that.
funny
Okay, we
because
somehow.
I had I'm like why is he struggling with constituted? Because like your mind just fills it. You know what I mean? Like how your mind like fills it in,
Well,
but
but like,
but, but it's
it's like,
clearly a typo. It's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What name?
Okay, was somehow constituted by the physical as opposed to just being correlated with it. But here intuition manifestly fails to deliver. Even dyed in the wool physicalists like myself feel the pull of the intuition that there could be a zombie who is physically just like me but has no feelings. In a possible world, so to speak, which lacks our laws relating to conscious states to brain states. So I liked that because it was like there's not really an intuition. Like setting the zombie example aside, like just the raw experience of red, it's like I mean, you could imagine that being a different shade or that being blue. The exact same brain state. At least like abstractly, you could imagine
Yes.
it could have been different.
Yes.
Like
There's
it's not.
nothing obvious about the way a particular brain state fires. I mean, we've talked about this before, where it's
Yeah,
not a priori predictable in any way what the like if you had no experiential report to correlate like some brain scan with, you'd have no idea. Like it's just not at all obvious. What? I
or
mean,
at
I
least the
guess
intuition there. Yeah.
yes, yes,
So
yes. Um, no, that's good. The end of that is actually he ties the bow on that nicely.
yeah.
Um, the second one he deals with and dispatches quickly. The second one is the argument from realization. He says this style of argument for physicalism begins with the claim that our concepts of conscious states are associated a priori with certain functional descriptions. It then appeals to empirical science to show that in this world, these functional descriptions are in fact filled by physical states. The trouble with this strategy, however, is that a priori conceptual analysis does not, in fact, seem to reveal associations with our concepts of conscious states and any functional descriptions. He'll return to this later on. I don't know. I just never even felt the pull of this one in the first place. So the fact that he moves on from it quickly was fine with me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I didn't fully like grasp what the realization argument was. He says here like he kind of returns to the point in later sections. So I don't have anything to add like at this moment. Um the large part of like the interest is the kind of causal argument that he adopts. So, and that's what the next section begins.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the one that actually matters. So the causal argument for the mind-brain identity. So this is the one that Papineau endorses. He thinks that an argument that he actually says establishes physicalism, which this is where my skeptical questions begin. But obviously liking it the whole way along. Okay, so this is the causal argument that he's talking about. So he says that this argument simply points out that as a matter of empirical fact, conscious states and physical states always seem to appear at the same place in the causal scheme of things, and concludes that they must therefore be identical. I'm gonna flag what I'm gonna like come back to at this point. I want to dig into what exactly we can learn by, or what exactly he means by appear at the same place in the causal scheme of things. I've got questions about that, but that's just kind of flagging it for now. So the argument's pretty simple. It just has three premises. So, okay, so premise one, conscious mental occurrences have physical effects. This one is one where I'm like, it depends. Like, whether you sign up for this kind of depends. Like, he's going to go on to like support these more in the next section. But my initial reaction is like, okay, I don't know yet. Maybe, maybe not.
I was actually kind of bewildered that that was like the first premise we were starting at for like an argument for physicalism. I kind of like wrote down like what? Like and you're right that it depends on kind of like what's being actually claimed here, right? Like what does he mean by this? But I was quite shocked by that as the first premise.
Yeah, I have a little question mark next to it, and I said, I mean, depends if you reject epiphenomenalism, because I mean, basically, like this premise is saying, okay, so conscious mental occurrences, so experiences, they have physical effects, meaning that this is directly going against epiphenomenalism and saying that okay, like mental mental operations, mental experiences, they will manifest themselves or cause physical changes. Um, right? I mean, that's how we're understanding this first one.
Mhm.
So, okay. Um, the second premise is that all physical effects have sufficient physical causes. This one I straightforwardly accepted.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
this is obviously, um, something that we're all ready to sign up for. Oh, so this is where he makes the point about like, we don't tend to think that things are over determined. He uses the example of the guy who's simultaneously shot and struck by lightning. So it's like,
Death is overdetermined.
yeah, yeah. So his death is like overdetermined, or like the guy who, he's got like some villain, pointing a gun at him and firing, and at the moment where like the bullet is about to enter his chest, like from fright, has like a heart attack and dies anyway. So it's like overdetermined. It's like really, really implausible that the world is always structured like that, where things are like overdetermined. So,
As a
um,
completely unrelated note too, that is a word that I've already like incorporated in my lexicon at this point. Like overdetermined is such a good word. Like
mhm. Well, it's also
it comes up so often
it
where it's just
no
like,
it
you fail in some respect, but then you realize you would have failed another way. And it's just like
does.
it was overdetermined. Like,
Yes,
like
yes. And
if
this is
not this,
also
then that.
it's it's so true. And it's one of the it's like one of the best examples too of where your philosophical lexicon can actually like the language available to you, at least this is my experience, it actually influences the way that you think about things. Where like if you don't
Oh yeah.
have the term for overdetermination, you can kind of, dimly like conceive of that. Like you kind of get like the feel of it almost, but being able to really identify the concept itself, it actually really does change your thinking. But
All right. So let me read the
but
next paragraph. Kind of. Oh, go ahead. What were you
oh,
gonna say?
well, I was just gonna say he uses this like, it's beyond implausible to think that the physical world is always overdetermined in this way. And so he concludes with the third premise, that's kind of backing for his third premise, that the physical effects of conscious causes aren't always overdetermined, which I agree. This is, you know, granting, because premise three is kind of piggybacking off of premise one in a sense
One.
where
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly where it is assuming, we're working under the assumption that conscious mental occurrences have physical effects. But given that there are physical effects of consciousness, because they're physical effects, they're not always overdetermined, which I agree
Yeah.
with sort of the conditional claim in that sense.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned with like the syllogism, like only one really matters.
I
Like
agree.
two and three, I just take on board easily. So
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
it's, like you said, three. As long as I agree that conscious states have physical effects, then it's like all right. But
Hmm.
I agree with three.
I'm prepared to jump to where he defends these premises in section four, but do we want to talk about anything first before that?
Yeah, I'm happy just to read it so we don't skip anything explicit,
That's fine.
and
Yeah,
there's no need to get bogged down later in the paper if we miss something.
I just
So
don't understand it.
yeah, I mean that could
Is
often be an issue.
Papineau? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So exactly what is involved in identifying conscious causes with physical causes? In the first instance, it depends on how you think of the relata, uh, probably yeah, really relation or relata of causation. I think of these as facts. In the present context of argument, it will come to the same thing if you think of them as states or as, quote, Kim events. That is, as instantiations of properties by particulars. On all of these views, the identification of conscious in physical causes requires that the conscious property of being in pain, say, is itself identical with the physical property having C fibers firing, since the relevant facts or states of or Kim events won't be identical if these properties aren't. What if you don't think of the relata of causation in any of the above ways, but as basic particulars, as Donald Davidson does? Then the causal argument, as phrased above, won't itself carry you to the identity of conscious and physical properties, since the identity of conscious Davidson events with physical ones only requires that the relevant causal and physical properties are instantiated in the same particular, not that the properties themselves are identical. Still, we can rephrase the argument. Let us take premise one, prime, to be the claim that all conscious events cause some physical events in virtue of their conscious properties. Premise 2 prime says that all physical events are caused by prior physical events in virtue of the latter's physical properties. And premise 3 prime says that the physical events of conscious causes aren't always caused twice over in virtue of two different properties of the prior circumstances. In order to make these consistent, we then need to once more identify the conscious properties of the causes with their physical properties.
So what I understood these like series of paragraphs like purpose is to say that even if you, like whether you endorse like the Kim events view or the Davidson events view, either way, to like make the argument consistent, you have to identify conscious properties of the causes with their physical properties. So it's an identity, basically saying like either way, you have to like there's an identity that's necessary.
Yeah. So okay, so on to section 4, where so this is where he defends the premises of the causal argument. And yeah, this is yeah. So I don't like how he deals with our questions about premise one. I just don't like that. And I'm just gonna straight up read the paragraph because it's only a couple sentences. You see, he says, okay, you can reject premise one and embrace epiphenomenalism or psychophysical parallelism. I take it that we would prefer to avoid these views if we can. We don't seem to find mechanisms involving causal danglers or brute parallels in other parts of the natural world. This gives us inductive reason not to expect them at the mind-brain interface either. And that's the whole support for premise one,
Crazy.
again, to just to kind of reiterate it, the first premise is that conscious mental occurrences have physical effects. So basically, like the conscious can cause and have like a cause effect relation on the physical. And he defends that by saying, like, well, you probably don't want to adopt epiphenomenalism or this other thing that I've never heard of, psychophysicalism parallelism, which I'm assuming is like the kind of overdetermination view where like both are walking alongside the causal chain, like this the physical and the mental. But it's like, okay, like we would prefer to avoid these views if we can, is just not a compelling retort to me, given that like first of all, if you're open to epiphenomenalism as I am, you're like, well, I'm kind of looking for you to explain like how this position is far more compelling, in fact, than epiphenomenalism. So you saying that we would like to avoid it is not like super compelling. But I also had a little bit of an issue with, this inductive reasoning argument because it's like, well, yeah, we don't find like causal danglers. I'm gonna avoid the brute parallels because like, yeah, that's right. But it's like, well, okay, but is that actually a very compelling argument given that nothing else presents the same kind of impediments to being studied in the same way that consciousness does? Like I don't know. It's like,
Yeah. It's
I don't know.
actually in fact dissimilar to other parts of the natural world, making
At least
he calls
potentially, like, yeah.
yeah, he calls it a causal dangler and then kind of dismisses it. I just thought like it
Mhm.
was crazy that like the premise, one, he dismisses like the rejection of it, but then like premise two, which seemed like kind of, at least from our perspective, I don't know who like what audience he was writing for, But that one, like, I didn't quibble with premise two at all, like the physical completeness of the
No,
world. And he
no, and
goes
he
like
spends
into a
more time
proper
on it.
paragraph
Yes,
for that one, not
yeah,
just like a few sentences. I didn't really know what to make of
yeah.
that. But to your point, Jordan, like I thought that was kind of a weakness of the paper. Like if he's saying that like rejecting the premises is less attractive than accepting the identity, you can't just like take the most controversial premise and just kind of like call it a causal dangler and move on. Brute parallels.
Yeah, and it's also like I just also thought it was very odd to spend more time on defending premise three, given that premise three is parasitic on premise one. And it's like, well, if I'm questioning premise one right now, really defending premise three, you know, um,
Yeah,
because
no.
it's like
Premise one needed the most elaboration, not the least.
well, he just begins the defense of premise three by saying you might even reject premise three and accept that physical effects of conscious causes also have distinct physical causes. And I'm like, well, I just wrote like, well, this isn't out of the question for me. Like, it's you know what I mean? Like, it's not as though it's not as though like I'm currently endorsing that, but it's just like I felt as though the real meat of the defense had to be located on premise one, and it just wasn't.
Yeah,
Um,
and even the premise three, he kind of rebuts it in the last sentence with the same way, like, well, no danglers and parallels in the natural world. I'm like,
yeah,
okay. I'd like to
it's
hear an elaboration of like, the
mhm.
rejection. But
What
that
I
that
also
was a
don't
disappointment for me.
it was, and it's also just because epiphenomenalism is a very naturalistic, friendly way of understanding consciousness in a way that you know yeah, is it a little bit more like ontologically weighty than this theory? Yeah, but it's also naturalistic in the sense that they're obeying the physical laws. Like
Yep.
the laws of consciousness are obeying the physical laws. So I don't know. It was too quick a rejection to really. It didn't
Yeah, and
add anything for me.
yeah, like I take it that we would prefer to avoid these views if we can. You can't just say that. It's crazy.
No, no,
Like I
I
still have in our previous conversation with epiphenomenalism, like the little image of like the choo-choo train going along and like the steam coming out, like that's intuitive to me. Like
mhm.
enough that like I need more than just like you could reject it, but we'd certainly prefer not to. I'm like, okay,
Yeah, it's like,
okay.
well, I'm not really with your preference quite yet. Like,
Yeah, I would like to be taken there, like I'm open to being taken there, but certainly
mhm.
not, you know, just an attack, calling it a brute parallel.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a brutal
Well, I think the
paragraph.
it was my
It
least
just
favorite part
is.
of the paper. It was just the
Yeah.
worst part of the paper for me.
Yeah, because I put
Um,
what like the only time I like actually like questioned what was being said was like premise one. I wrote, what? That's how
mhm,
we're starting this? And then like
mhm.
whenever he discusses it in detail, he doesn't discuss it in detail.
And this is it's not going to be raised yet, but actually in the next section,
Yeah. Which we can move
I've
on to.
got. Oh, well, I was going to say that the next section after five is where
Oh,
I've got a lot of stuff written in the margins where it circles back around to premise one. Um, but
yeah.
yeah, I
Do we
just
want
I
to just
just
move
did
to
not.
five and then to six?
Yeah, because
Unless
section
Adam, you had any thoughts. I don't know if you've spoken much about it.
sure.
No, let's keep it moving because I think when I read this paper originally, I forgot because it was a week ago. But
Mhm.
premise one, the defense, I was very disappointed.
Yeah.
So
All right, then we're all squared then. So
yeah,
five, then Jordan.
Yeah, this is where this is where he makes what I thought was a very good kind of I guess you could call it a caveat where he just he's talking about like this is a physicalist argument, but you might think that there is a problem with what he's talking about where so if the property of being in pain is identical with C fibers firing, which I actually don't know what C fibers are, but I'm assuming it's some sort of like a neural connection of some kind in the brain. Um,
Yeah, that's what I
I,
just assumed. I didn't like really
I,
look into it.
yeah, I'm assuming it's some sort of neural connection that humans have. Um, the problem is that you might think that, well, maybe actually it's pain is not associated with C fibers firing. Maybe it's actually maybe pain is actually associated with like a certain pattern of informational firing. That is not, it doesn't have to be C fibers because as we said, like, well, we think like an octopus could be in pain, but octopi don't have C fibers. So maybe you're not going to identify the conscious state with physical material, like certain physical material firing in certain ways. Maybe it's actually, as he's going to say, there's a kind of a solution to this. It's to talk about the functional operations of the physical system itself, um, which, given how strongly we agreed with Chalmers' previous arguments about substrate independence, I thought this was a very good clarification. Um, to kind of, it's he clarifies that, it's this is in the middle of the first full paragraph on 378. He says, so we might read cause in premise one in a general sense, which allows a state to cause in virtue of having a realizer which causes. So basically it's going to be like, so he's basically saying like brain state X realizes the functional state or property Y, which is identical to conscious state Z. So, um, if I'm understanding this correctly, he's basically just allowing room for the idea that, like we said in the Chalmers episode, like it's not about the carbon-based meat firing. It's actually about the pattern of firing itself.
Yeah.
So, if it's about the pattern of firing, then it's actually about the function, but it's still physical in the sense that that is being carried out by a physical network. Um,
Right.
was that kind of like a coherent explanation for me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because it made a lot of sense to me the way he laid that
I did
out.
I didn't have an issue with this part.
No, okay,
Yeah.
good. Um, okay, and he basically wraps up the section by just saying like, but as I kind of said, both of these are physical in the relevant sense. And so when I talk about like, a physicalist explanation, I'm leaving open that it could be either of these. Consciousness could
Mhm.
be substrate dependent, but there's good reason to think it's probably substrate independent. So you can adopt either of those. So okay. So this is where section six is where he really ties the bow on the argument, where he goes, this is just where I get to a lot of my skeptical questions. Um, this is where he talks about, the identity between conscious states and physical states really paving over all of these worries, these anti-physicalist worries. So I'll just read the first paragraph. If conscious properties are identical to material properties, then I say there is no mystery of why material properties give rise to conscious properties. This is because identities need no explaining. If the two properties are one, then the material property doesn't give rise to the conscious property. It is the conscious property. And if it is, then there is no mystery of why it is what it is. So here he's basically circling back around and he's coming back to this kind of like, very intuitive worry about materialism, where we might think like, hey, how the hell is it possible that, these purely physical interactions, how on earth could that possibly give rise to an experience? And he's going to say this is actually kind of a misplaced worry because the two are in fact identical. The conscious properties and the material properties. And if they're identical, then there's no explanation needed. We don't need to explain identities in this way.
For me, it just still seems like the gap still exists. So,
Yeah,
especially
same.
for, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how relevant this is, but I will say, I thought the epiphenomenalism paper we read in our last episode um, did a really good job for me kind of clarifying like almost like pure experiential kind of conscious states versus kind of propositional states,
Hmm.
which once you that helped me distinguish the two a lot. So like now I really, really care about purely experiential states. I don't care about
Yes.
belief or held or like states that the brain could kind of capture certain information. I'm more focused on like the visceral experience of seeing red. It's
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
does this capture that? You know, is
Yes.
the experience of seeing red identical to, you know, some sort of either function or property of matter, you know? So,
Yeah. I think that's good because it clarifies like, the real kind of the most important thing to focus on here are the ways in which experientially we seem to differ from something like just computational processing. Like it's just
yeah,
if you're thinking about like doing a math problem in your head, like there's kind of a straightforward analogy to at least like a way that that could be represented in the brain in the same way that a computer represents like doing that on the Excel sheet or whatever. But the raw conscious experience of just like, seeing red is not at least analogous to that. So it's like yeah, I just agree that that's the most important case.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
he kind
So
of
like just
comments on this in the last two paragraphs of section 6. I don't know if we want to read
mhm,
that.
okay. Yeah, we'll definitely get to that. I just wanted to kind of
Yeah,
all
please.
for us to keep
mhm,
that in mind. You know what I mean? Just like
mhm,
the difference there, where it's like whenever he's
mhm,
talking or writing here, it's like let's keep in mind those very visceral type
mhm,
Yep.
experiences that were differentiated in the last paper.
No,
So
I
mhm,
agree, Adam. I think that was a good clarifier. And it's definitely the thing that I'm looking at, like looking for most is like the pure experiential thing.
mhm.
Um, so I don't know, Jordan, do you want me to read like the last two paragraphs of section 6?
Yeah, that's fine. My questions arise before that.
Oh,
Um,
and like the analogies?
yeah.
Yeah, let's go
So,
through it. Yeah, in order then.
okay, I want to read the first three sentences of the next paragraph.
Yeah,
An
please.
analogy, an analogy will help to make the point clear. Suppose you don't know that Tony Curtis and Bernie Schwartz are the same person. Which is this like is that like I actually don't I didn't get the reference because I think he's British. Is that like I'm assuming that's like a Mark Twain and who was Mark Twain really? Was it
Daniel Clemens,
yeah, thank
what do
you.
I
you
I was
yeah.
assumed the same thing. I
is
didn't
it that
inquire
sort of a
further.
thing?
I
Okay,
assumed.
I assume it's that sort of a thing. Um Then you are told that they are identical. Now, this might well prompt you to ask for an explanation of what shows they are identical. And the answer, presumably, would be that they always appear in the same place in the causal scheme of things. But why? But it makes, but it would make no sense for you to then ask for a further explanation of why they are identical. Why does Tony Curtis equal Bernie Schwartz? Seems almost ill-formed. If they are one, then they are. The single person couldn't possibly have been two people. Okay, so given that, he's saying if they show up in the same causal scheme, in the same place in the causal scheme of things, you that is what is determining whether they are identical. Correct? I'm parsing that correctly, right? Because he's saying, well, the answer presumably would be that they always appear in the same place in the causal scheme of things. So if they do, then it doesn't really make any sense to ask further explanations as to why. Okay.
I'm okay with that.
I, I've got a question about that.
Okay.
So if they show up, okay, I just don't, I've got questions about like whether that showing up in the same causal scheme of things being identical, I have a question about. So like one way I thought you could drive a wedge into that claim is the following. So I was trying to think of like, okay, can I come up with an example of two non-identical things showing up in the same causal role but not being identical? Right? That
Okay.
if I can
Yeah.
do that, that would put pressure on this argument, right?
Hmm.
If they're in the same causal chain at all
Hmm.
times, yes,
Yes.
yes, yes.
Okay, so I came up with an example of like this is a simple example, obviously, but if you think about like a Rube Goldberg machine, if you had two balls that you could swap in and out of the system, one was a solid aluminum ball, and the other one was a steel ball that just had some area in the center of it hollowed out so that they had the same mass. Those would be, in the causal scheme of things, identical, but themselves not identical to each other. Correct?
It's specifically in that.
In that
y-
restricted scope. I had to
Yes.
make it
Yeah.
simple to like figure
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I understand that there's, the mind is not a Rube Goldberg machine, but like, but that is an example where in the relevant scope of causality, they play the same causal role, but themselves are not identical. And it,
I don't know if I would agree with that necessarily as like a
okay.
as a major takedown because like in this case you're supposing that like that the two balls could like interchange like within this
Mhm.
a single run of like the machine. Is that like what you're suggesting, or that they like you run it once with the one, run it once with the other, and they're doing the same
Mhm.
thing? Yeah, if
Yeah,
it's like I mean,
that they show up in the same causal role of like the system.
I don't know. I'm like I don't know if that really like tackles it because what I'm imagining is if it's like it could do the same thing within like a scope. Like
Hmm.
I'm imagining like if you have like a scene like you're filming for a movie and you have like the main actor, punching like a
Hmm.
stunt guy, and then you have like you swap in for another take and have like
Hmm.
his stunt double like do the swing as
Hmm.
well. Like I don't really think that that's necessarily like the same as like that them being like identical, even though they could have at least from our eyes like the same functional role. Like
Hmm.
there's enough like difference between those two things that like just aren't manifesting to our eyes, if that makes sense.
And I also think, just to kind of add to what Giffin said, like the idea of swapping out, I I think it's good with that example to say that they're not identical. Um, but I mean, keep in mind, like his sentence is like they always appear at the same place in the causal scheme of things. So we're talking about like all things, they both appear, in the same causal position in the scheme of all things.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's like so you're kind of bringing up an example of like what about like the causal role things could play in one thing and they don't appear in the same place because you're swapping it out. Like they're not both present there. Only one's present. I just feel like it's probably not too analogous.
It was never supposed to be like a direct analogy because I couldn't come up with one, but for me, it raised questions about, but I think you both have, I'd have to think about it more. I think you both make good points. I had questions about like, well, it relates to further questions, so it'll
Because
come up
I think
again.
would be I think the more important part, if I had to kind of harp on one thing, it would be that in the scheme of all things. You know what I mean? Because like what
Hmm.
happens when you put those balls like then on the table? You know what I mean?
Or
Like,
just when you
and it's
introduce like, a magnetic force into things, is they are no longer
sure,
identical. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure,
yeah.
and it's like okay, well, if you both balls were on the table, like, are there now, is there a force applied to two different spots on the table at that point? It's like if
Hmm.
yes, then two different things, not identical.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah, they would need to be
so
like superimposed nearly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
and if they're superimposed, then you do get to the overdetermination thing where like one's mental and one's physical. No, that's a good point. The phrase, I didn't like the phrase or something like that, but I guess maybe hopefully this I think maybe what this was is like it's an initial question that then led to what I hope is at least a better skeptical challenge, in the form of a question.
I just wanted to note that like the first sentence of that third paragraph in section 6 also mentions particulars. So I'm not sure if like how relevant like the particulars from our previous conversation is relevant. But I noted that it appeared again.
This example involves
mm,
an identity between spatiotemporal particulars. But the same goes for identities between universals. Oh, I see.
Because
So
the
yeah, that's
Davidson had, in that conversation, like particulars was
mhm,
brought up as opposed to properties, and I noticed that particulars appeared
mhm.
again here. So I'm not sure.
No, this actually makes a lot of sense because remember we were saying like the particulars could be like, okay, well, this instance of pain is associated with this specific like brain state. And it's kind of analogous in the previous example because it's Tony Curtis and Bernie Schwartz. But
Mhm.
you might kind of want to generalize it. And that's where he brings in the second example, where he says,
Yeah.
suppose you don't know that water equals H2O. Then you are told that they are in fact the same stuff. You can sensibly ask for an explanation of what shows they are the same stuff. And the answer again will be that they appear in the same place in the causal scheme of things. But it does not make good sense to ask in addition why they are the same stuff, to ask for some further explanation of why water is H2O. If they are the same stuff, they are, and that's it. Um, I'll continue reading actually. Exactly the same point I say applies to the identity of conscious and material properties. We can ask for an explanation of what shows that pains are identical to the firing of C fibers. Once more, they appear in the same place in the causal scheme of things. But it makes no sense to then ask for a further explanation of why pains arise from C fibers firing. If they are C fiber firings, they don't arise from them, they are them, and that's it.
Yeah.
All right, okay, this I don't think this is incoherent, but like, okay, here's part of my confusion here is like, um, part of his rejection of premise one was to reject epiphenomenalism. And part of, I take it, why he's rejecting epiphenomenalism is that he doesn't want to endorse that the mental never causes the physical. Like he doesn't want
Yes,
the causal
yes.
danglers. Okay, but then what is it like? My question is then, okay, but what does it mean for the mental to cause the physical then if they're identical? Um, like, like cause and effect involves two separate entities. So if we're talking about like the mental causing the physical, like I begin to like kind of lose track of how that would work, like under this understanding. Because it's like I, I I understand you wouldn't so I on my understanding of what he's arguing for, like it's not that the pain causes the C fiber to fire, because as he said, they are identical. But then like in what sense, so if they're identical, like it just feels weird to say that the mental is causing the physical then, because the C fiber fires that causes your, kind of like um if you've put your hand on like a hot stove or whatever, like your neural firings cause the muscle contraction to pull your hand back, whatever, right?
I feel like it's like a perspective shift on his part, right? Where it's like
Hmm.
the mental kind of causing the physical is just kind of like an examination first of our own mind, which is just to say, like, it seems like there are physical effects from,
Hmm.
conscious states, but by the end, he would probably just say, well, what's really happening is the C fiber is really just interactions in the brain, are then in fact just causing further physical interactions somewhere else in the brain, right?
Yeah.
Like, but
So
at least like
then, mhm.
there is some perception that the mental in fact has physical causes, right?
Okay, so then this is my point. Isn't that entirely compatible with epiphenomenalism?
Well, but I think yes. I mean, our entire issue is that he just kind of just throws away premise one and doesn't really
Yeah,
defend it.
yeah. No, I'm
I
saying
mean,
like,
that's our
but
entire
the
issue. It
yeah, yeah, but the way he circles
doesn't like
back
causal thing.
around,
Yeah.
yeah, but the way he circles back around to it it is actually like a really great defense of like epiphenomenalism because all he's doing is saying like if you viewed the conscious like it's almost like a visual image I'm getting of like you kind of have like the physical network going on, and then you have these like just off gassings almost of like the physical system. And it's like, okay, well, if you're like if you're going to make this kind of an argument, isn't it actually like just as good as a defense of the phenomenalism as it is of materialism? Like I just or physicalism rather. Like I don't
Yeah, I don't think he really defends himself against epiphenomenalism at all.
no,
No.
no, no.
This
Because
paper
yeah.
should have been able to properly address like my intuition of the choo-choo train analogy, and he
Hmm.
doesn't. And I like a huge failing. To your point earlier, Jordan, about like the like taking his like conclusion about like the identities, like basically says it's like needed to square premises one, two, and three, right? But
Hmm.
in doing so, if you kind of like start like applying that reasoning just to premise one, it starts to like seem unintuitive because of like the causation element to it.
Yeah,
Right.
I
So it's
still
like
yeah.
in squaring
Mhm.
the premises, he like kind of destroys like the what it means for one of the premises to exist. That's like the tension that
Hmm.
you've identified, if I'm
I
correct.
think so, yeah. I mean
Okay, and
like
I
it
think I
just
agree.
yeah, because it's like I'm losing the understanding of like if part of your rejection of like epiphenomenalism has to do with the mental causing the physical, it's like I get what you're saying, Adam, about like the perspective shift, but there's a way in which like that doesn't fully square the concern for me. Because like if we're talking about cause and effect, like that is operating between two to operate like cause and effect relations are between like two different entities. And I understand that like you can kind of try to reframe that as like, well, you know, this one entity having an effect on the other, it almost has like two sides to the same coin. You know what I mean? Like there's the mental is like one side of the coin and the other side of the coin is the physical, but it would be incorrect to say that they're two different coins. You know, like it is still one coin, but like I don't know. It's not obvious in what sense like all I'm saying is like I feel this like there's something a little off about saying that the mental causes the physical still in that like scheme of
Yeah.
things.
I also think if you're talking like very low level physics, then like cause and effect clearly has two entities. But if you're talking
Hmm.
more of like in an abstract way, it need not.
Hmm.
So like I mean like the brain can cause the brain to do something, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
yeah, like that's
Hmm.
not an issue. We don't need two entities there.
Hmm.
So that I have less of an issue with that and more so just an issue with the original premise, which is that like
Hmm.
when we're talking about, the mental causing something in the physical, are we like how do we mean it?
Hmm.
Do it in the sense that like there is an intuition that, if I feel pain, that in fact like there is some sort of physical effect from that. It's like, yeah, I think that's true. There is like the intuition that like I mean I think are there any
It's
studies on people who specifically, I don't know, I'm not sure how relevant this is, but that have all the same, for lack of a better word, machinery in place um, to register pain. But we know there are people who can like put their hand on a hot
mhm.
stove and nothing, right? But oftentimes there's like some sort of physical damage in place, so they're not really registering the pain. But are there people out there who, there's no perceived kind of deficit in machinery, and they can put their hand on the hot stove and feel nothing. So there's like, in a sense, no physical cause due to the kind of experiential or a kind of lack of experience there. You know what I mean? If that was
I
where
don't
you're going to
know.
go.
No,
Yeah, because
yeah, I got the question. I just don't know.
like that would be like an interesting example, at least, where it's just like, okay, in this case, there was no physical effect because there was no mental cause. Versus
Hmm.
like in almost all cases where like, oh, there's actually just like deficit machinery,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
efficient. It's
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it just seems weird. He's almost like I'm almost like imagining a version of this paper where it's actually like a covert operation by like an epiphenomenalist, and then section 7 is like, well, actually, materialists, if you're willing to accept all of these, you've actually accepted everything you need to accept in order to endorse epiphenomenalism. You know what I mean? Like where he pulls back the curtain because it's like it's actually very, very odd. Maybe like I take your point, Adam, about like, the brain can cause something within the brain. But 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 then my point is like, okay, well, but then if you're thinking of it like you are talking about two separate entities with a cause and effect relation within the brain. And it just seems weird to say that the mental like on like this argument, like wouldn't it be the case that the mental would only cause the physical because it's almost like it's not really the mental causing the physical. It's like the mental can cause the physical only because the mental is the physical in a
Yes,
sense. Like
that is
yeah,
100%.
yeah,
And we
yeah.
totally disagree too, because it's just like it's like how to phrase this, but I mean, if the color was not red and blue instead, it's like, would that have had a different effect on the physical? And it's like, no, if everything physical was identical.
Hmm.
You know, like if all the same functionality was in place, the answer is no. There is actually no effect that the mental has on the physical. So we just reject premise one.
Yeah, yeah. Like
Like,
and
no, no, it's as simple as physical effects have physical causes and just leave it at that.
yeah,
So
yeah. I also this is a slightly separate point. I think you and I have talked about this before, Adam, but like I have never so the water equals H2O analogy is a staple in this debate.
it's a
I've
bad one.
never I've never liked this example. And it to my eye, it once again is like it's actually bolstering like anti-physicalist intuitions for me. Because I don't know if like you guys had the same reaction to the case, but when I hear like water equals H2O, it's not that I agree with that intuition. It's not that I disagree with that, like, not intuition statement. It's like I don't even know what that means in some sense.
No,
Because,
I
like,
had the same note, Jordan.
yeah,
Like, so every I have like developed the habit. I think I commented on it like last time or the time prior that like whenever I see anything that kind of just like involves like an assessment of linguistics, I kind of like sneer at it. And this is a
yeah,
case where like he kind of produces like this like water equals H2O. And I'm like, this is like such a sloppy explanation. Like this is an area where like you were told that they are in fact the same stuff, and what you can sensibly ask. I'm like, no. Are you saying like
mm,
this is like is the claim about like the molecular constituency of like the what we see in like the world, or is like or is it like the word represents the same phenomenon? It's just like I just really disliked the use of water equals H2O. So I'm glad you
Yeah, I,
brought it
I,
up.
I totally agree, Giffin, because this begins to kind of sneakily trespass on science at this point, or at least the empirical mind, where it's just like, suppose you don't, because you can follow along where it's like, okay, you're a person who's been given a separate explanation for this clear substance, liquid, and you're,
Odorless, whatever.
yeah, exactly, exactly. You know that it is made up of two parts hydrogen, one part oxygen, but then you're given a separate explanation where you've got this other exactly, or seemingly similar stuff, but it's different. It's water. But now you're told they're identical. And then it's like you can sensibly ask for an explanation of what shows they are the same stuff. And the answer again will be that they appear in the same place in the causal scheme of things. But
That's
then it
not
does
an
not
answer.
make no, it's not an
That's
answer.
ridiculous. If I heard someone say that, I'd slap them.
Yeah, no,
It's absurd.
I'd be like, okay, well, is it made up of two parts hydrogen, one part oxygen? Like it's like
Yes, like
does it share all the exact same properties of this other substance? It's like, yeah, it does. It's like, okay, then they are the same.
mhm. and
So
and this is why I think like for me actually it actually really bolsters like my anti-physicalist intuitions because when you go okay, so it's like H2O is referring to the molecular structure. Water, I don't know what we're referring to by water until you spell out like what you mean more specifically. Because it's like, we refer to like, okay, when I say like if you like, hey, can I get a glass of water? Like I'm referring to the stuff that comes out of the faucet that is more than H2O.
Yes.
But like I'm referring to it's like a,
Or a
like
river.
a
It's like an ecosystem
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
practically.
Yeah, so it's like okay, water. When I say the word water, I'm always, it's just this kind of like, it's a linguistic surrogate for the thing I really mean, right? Um, because there's actually like there's nothing about the word water that means anything other than like so we could just like no one could ever say the word water again. We could always just say H2O if we were talking about pure water. We could always just, it'd be absurd, but you could just rattle off like, you know what I mean? Like the molecular compound of like whatever was coming out of the font, you know what I mean? Like the font, like water doesn't refer to anything, but I actually find this to be extremely disanalogous when we shift the domain and talk about conscious states and, or conscious properties and physical properties. Because when I talk about pain, I'm not referring to something else. I'm referring to pain simpliciter, the conscious experience simpliciter. I'm not using it as a surrogate for some other. If only I knew the brain state, then I could simply refer to the brain state. No, and that's not an argument that they couldn't be the same. But it is like it's a conceptual point of like the identity, it's not straightforwardly analogous in the same because we do know what um brain state is at least like what brain states or areas of the brain or whatever are like associated with being in pain. But it's not as though I'm like, oh, like that's what I meant. It's like, no, I'm it and he does like address this later on, but in a way that I still find a little bit unsatisfying. I just think that this analogy does not work on.
I think you put that very well.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I think yeah, I
it
that
just
that
does
was a
not
good
work for
breakdown of
me.
like exactly what is wrong with this. So yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to make one final point on section 6, and then we can maybe move on to section 7. Well, I guess
Mhm.
first to sum up how I feel about the previous part. I think he committed the dual sin of like using tricky linguistics and invoking science improperly. So that's a
Yeah,
sin in my
that,
mind.
that gets you sent to Siberia twice for Giffin.
Yeah.
Indeed. But the last paragraph kind of does sort of address the what its likeness, like qualia, and I think that's important to just at least read it before we move on.
Yeah, yeah,
Perhaps it is worth making clear that I certainly do not want to deny the what its likeness of conscious occurrences. To say that pains are identical with C fibers firing is not to deny that it is like something to be in pain. Rather, it is to affirm that it is like something to have your C fibers firing. Indeed, it is precisely what we have found via the causal argument in section 3. Feeling a pain is having your C fibers firing, excuse me. And given this, there is no further mystery of why firing C fibers should feel like that. The two states are the same, and that's it. And we kind of just spent a decent amount of time dissecting whether that's valid or not. But I at least wanted to hear his words on
yeah.
that kind of like, gap.
I so on 381, I have this paragraph. It's the one, two, three, fourth paragraph
Hmm.
Um, because he does backtrack on like the water equals H2O analogy. Because he says, from this point of view, scientific identities like water equals H2O provide a bad model for the physicalist identification of mental with material properties. In the scientific case, we can indeed show how H2O satisfies certain descriptions associated with water, associated a priori with water, and use this as a route to the conclusion that water is H2O. However, the assumption that all physicalist identifications must conform to this pattern does physicalism a disservice. This pattern of argument is fine with our pre-theoretic concepts. I'm sorry. This pattern of argument is fine when our pre-theoretic concepts are associated a priori with functional descriptions, but there is no need to insist on this form of identification when our concepts are not. I don't know that. I was just hoping that maybe that would clarify something for me.
I mean, I'm not sure he has successfully clarified for me.
Just reading the footnote real quick. Do this one. No, the footnote doesn't help.
Read the next paragraph. So, some terminology of David Chalmers will help to make it clear why there are no functional descriptions associated a priori with our everyday concepts of conscious states. Perhaps the word pain does not have some analytic connections with certain descriptions, like quote, deriving from physical injury, generating avoidance behavior, and so on. But in this use, says Chalmers, pain just expresses a psychological concept. However, we also have a phenomenal concept of pain
Mm.
as something with a certain what its likeness. And this phenomenal concept of pain is quite different from the psychological concept, as is shown by the fact that there is no a priori reason to suppose that their reference will always be found together. If we now know the feeling, the unpleasant one, is generally present in individuals who are in the psychological state, it is on the basis of empirical evidence. As far as reflection on our concepts goes, it seems possible that some other feeling, or none at all, should generally accompany things like bodily damage and writhing around. Okay, I'm just going to continue because
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me so far.
I agree about all of this, and I'm
Mhm.
happy to that the important question is what our phenomenal concepts refer to. Chalmers is quite right to insist that the crucial concepts at issue are phenomenal concepts. They are the ones that make people feel so puzzled about the mind brain relation. Still, even if phenomenal concepts, unlike psychological concepts, have no a priori connection with any descriptions, it doesn't follow they don't refer to material properties. Or to repeat, my preferred causal route to this conclusion doesn't presuppose any a priori connection between our phenomenal properties and any descriptions.
Yeah, this was related to his rejection of the second argument, right? For physicalism, where he does not want the connection to be based on an a priori.
The
Well,
realization.
yeah, the
Yeah,
realization. Thank you.
but also I think it's kind of he's kind of talking or kind of responding to what you just brought up, which is like
Mm,
saying like, okay, when you say you're in pain, you're referring to the kind of
mhm,
conscious state that you're experiencing when you say
mhm,
pain. But that doesn't mean that you're not really referring to the physical property.
mhm.
Like
If they're identical, yeah. Like,
identity. Like so
yeah, yeah. I this is really kind of like a almost like a free philosophical like thing I'm about to say. It's like I I have a hard time understanding the identity claim in general. Like spelling out what exactly it means for a phenomenal experience to be identical to a physical state is because it's like it it's it has to be something above their association because the phenomenalists would think that they're associated. Even dualists might think they're associated if you have like an overdetermination um, view, like the parallelism. But like, I don't know, maybe identity just is that. Maybe identity is just, it is nothing more than they show up in the same like causal scheme of things. Like when you get one, you get the other. I don't know. I wish I was one thing I was wanting more of here is like spelling out identity maybe in juxtaposition to some other things, you know, like like mere association or something like that. Like what does it mean for them to be identical beyond being associated? Um,
Our big issue is I just don't feel this rules out epiphenomenalism at all. It all
no.
just goes
No, it does.
it all goes back to that where like every single example I think of, like I was just imagining like a certain individual who actually derives like much pleasure from pain,
Mhm.
and like they have almost like a euphoric conscious experience, from the experience of pain. But it's like their phenomenal experience of euphoria, we don't think actually does the driving of
Mhm.
maybe them out more pain. It's like there's actually physical mechanisms underlying it that are the real causes to, the change in brain states.
Mhm.
And the euphoria is just maybe maybe it's due to a certain configuration of the mechanism underlying, but it's not the
Mhm.
driver. It's like it's an output, but it's not.
Mhm.
I don't know. I just any doesn't rule out epiphenomenalism. It seems like he should have gone
No,
way more.
no, he should have. He should have. I mean, I'm even just looking at my notes of like the last two sections, and it's just the same thing. I just have in the margins, how does this support physicalism over any other theory? Um, I also thought that the I didn't like the simulation point that he makes in section 8 because it's again it's kind of like what we've been talking about where like it, like I don't like the point about like inducing things via simulation um because if you're looking at two worlds, one world in which physicalism is true and one world in which physicalism is false, if you allow for knowledge via simulation of experiences, you're going to get the same result in both worlds. So it actually doesn't tell you anything. It was the same. It's the same with just goes back to like our original discussion with Mary's room. Like if you're allowing the artificial inducing of experiences to play a role in your kind of like you know theorizing here, then like I said, in world one where physicalism is true, you're going to get like a certain, you're going to be able to reason to certain results. You're also going to be able to do that where physicalism is false. So it just doesn't differentiate anything for me.
Yeah, and kind of relating to that too, like it's a little strange in this paper that he kind of acknowledges early in the paper that in a different world with the same physical properties at play, they could give rise, at least conceptually, to very different phenomenal experiences.
Hmm.
But and says like, well, there's no a priori reason that they must give rise to this specific phenomenal experience. I feel like that's never really addressed where it's like, yeah, okay, C fibers firing in a certain way, and either some sort of functional way or just a property of them give rise to pain. But
Mm.
in a conception that could be very different, where they gave rise to actually very different, or not give rise, but they in fact are synonymous with a very different feeling.
Mm.
Um, Conceptually, why are they associated with one thing versus an entire like? Isn't that gap
Yeah.
still there? Like
Hmm.
what?
No,
I just he explains
yeah.
the gap. I don't know. I just it doesn't
No,
explain
you're
it
you're
all.
you're so right. We're like all if you grant him everything he's saying here, it just changes the hard problem from like it just reformulates it to like but why on earth do C fibers firing or why on earth does like this functional kind of like orchestration of information processing or whatever like how the fuck does that give rise to like a conscious experience and why and like it,
And
it
he's like
just
he's saying it's like, oh, it's not even give rise. It's like when
sure,
you
sure,
say,
sure, yeah, sorry, you're right,
yeah,
it is,
when you
yeah,
say you're in
yeah,
pain, you're really saying like, oh, I this is what it feels like to be in pain. It's really like this is what it feels like to have C fibers firing. It's like, well, why that
Wha-
specific? Like why?
yeah,
So
yeah, why like no I'm like I'm being pushed towards like Mysterianism.
is that an actual word?
I think
Mysterious.
I think it's actually it's a position like in this debate.
Mysterianism.
Or am I getting like a syllable wrong or something? I think it's like straight up uh, philosophy of mind. Mysterianism.
That's
Yeah,
funny.
I feel
That
this.
is a real thing. Mysterious.
Yeah, there's the Colin McGinn. Uh, is like the most famous Mysterian. uh, I say that a little tongue in cheek, but like because it's a very bold thesis that like not only do we not know, but we can never know. I don't know that I'm like ready to sign up for that, but I'm like currently we don't fucking know.
Yeah.
What
No.
what I what I would what I want to see from this debate is I want to see a real like divergent claim made where like if this theory is right, then things have to be this way. Or you know what I mean? Like and if and it but importantly, it can't be the case that all the other theories can kind of ride along and say, well, we're happy with the state of the world too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's just like with this paper, I I just don't see this paper has provided me with no reason to endorse physicalism over epiphenomenalism currently. And I'd like to see, I mean, I would just, yeah, that's kind of what I'm like looking for here is like I would like to see someone make like a that argument.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it's very good to keep reading these different perspectives though, because like
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's always really
even
interesting.
yeah, even though it like kind of leaves me even more uncertain, I'm more so like, okay,
And
at
it's
the very least I've explored this idea and I found it lacking. So
and it's also like
so
it's an informed like um lack of confidence. It's not, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's a huge difference. Yeah.
it's a massive difference.
No
I would love to
way.
return to IIT to mock it more.
we just reread the paper.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any like final thoughts. I mean, I are we gonna like actually formally go through like sections 8 or 9? 'Cause I mean, I feel like we kind of touched on most of it. I have like some critiques, I guess, but I think we've kind of come to the same conclusion that,
Mhm.
my choo-choo train model has not been rebutted, despite the fact that this purports to, and that's
Yeah.
a deficit in the paper.
Yeah,
I agree.
I agree. I agree. Um, I thought his, I thought the error theory that he gives for why we feel there's still a gap is interesting at the very least. It's on the bottom of 384. He says, this subjective commonality between the imaginative deployment of phenomenal concepts and the experiences they refer to can easily confuse us when we contemplate ideas like pains equal C fibers firing. We focus on the left-hand side, deploy our phenomenal concept of pain, that feeling, and feel a tiny bit twingy. Then we focus on the right side, deploy our concept of C fibers firing, and feel nothing, or at least nothing in the pain dimension. We may visually imagine nerve cells and so forth. Uh, and so we conclude that the right hand side leaves out the feeling of pain itself, the unpleasant what its likeness, and refers only to the distinct physical correlates of pain. I think that this line of thought is extremely common, both within philosophy and without. When we use our phenomenal concepts imaginatively, we bring we bring to mind, in a literal sense, an instance of the experiential property we are thinking about. When we use non-phenomenal concepts, this does not occur. And this makes it seem to us that non-phenomenal concepts cannot possibly denote the same experiential properties that are picked out by our phenomenal concepts. So it is an interesting and I think pretty compelling like error theory about like it doesn't address our concerns, I don't think, but
I
um,
think I think the use mentioned fallacy probably does appear in a lot of like
mhm.
discussions of this, but yeah, it just doesn't address our concerns.
I'm always a fan of kind of like error theory diagnoses. I mean, I think they're cool to do, but I think this one it probably does actually explain a good bit of like um, maybe some thinking on this, but I don't think it addresses kind of our substantive criticisms. Um, he concludes by saying the solution, of course, is to resist the fallacy. The feelings aren't something extra. Having feelings is just what it is to be in certain material states. Once we accept this, we can stop sliding back into dualism. So I mean, it's good ending in a sense, but I just think he needed to spend. I do think he just needed to address like premise one, just much more clearly. I mean,
Yeah, you
like kind
can't
of
be like, you could adopt epiphenomenalism, but we all don't like that, boys, do we?
yeah, yeah,
Like, all right.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's like well,
It,
you could you could you could vote for Bernie, but he's a socialist, and we just can't go for that. Now, could we, boys? It's like, well, we're contemplating it.
it,
It's, you know,
yeah.
it's like that's your argument against Bernie. It's like we just don't want to go for him. Like, well, what if we do?
Well, then we've lost.
Yeah.
Still a good paper though. I like the
No, it
writing style
is.
Yeah.
because honestly, writing style makes up so much of my enjoyment.
It
Um,
does.
even, even if I'm like, premise one wasn't substantiated. Oh wow, it's like at least it's clear writing. I mean, it's
Yeah, the capacity to critique it directly is something that we have not had
No, it's
recently.
yes,
true.
We've been
yes.
like
No,
debating
it's
whether or not we should or like address it as such.
Yeah, but
no,
that's
it's
such
right
a
because
perfect way of putting it. Like it's like if I can arrive with, substantive things to say about the paper, then it's like it was a good paper versus like I understand this, infinite regression that I'm not sure follows. I don't know.
So we had to sort out the tautologies from the nonsense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it beats the let's in our audio only discussion. Let's discuss figure four for 40 minutes.
listeners keep up now.
Some good looking graphics, I'll give him that.
No,
So well put together
I,
pseudoscience. So
I feel like I could just this paper was I just felt like my claws could get around this paper.
I think if I read subsequent papers that totally invalidate epiphenomenalism, then I'm going to return to this paper with kind of
Mm.
like a little more clear-eyed. But the fact that like we're like, I don't know, there's several different views on how this could all be. I mean, do we think that, I mean, panpsychism was addressed? Not really. It's kind of like epiphenomenal, like not really, and that's kind of a leading thing too. Like I think there were just a lot of leading views. He's like, okay, well, it's a takedown of like overdetermined dualism. It's like I wasn't, you know what I mean? Like
No,
I
you're right. I
wasn't
mean,
an
That's a good way to
that's
put it.
yeah,
yeah,
no,
no.
it's like overdetermined parallelism was like dualist parallelism was the only thing that was really taken down in this paper, and I
Yeah,
wasn't
and
really
I'm like, I
too.
wasn't.
And
Yeah,
half
yeah,
the
I wasn't on
takedown
that.
was calling it brute parallelism.
Yeah.
Well, if you agree with the brute, we've already lost.
That's so funny. That's like Sartre, like in Nausea, whenever he was like, "Oh yeah, like the social democrat, make him a pedo." Like in the book, he's like, yeah, his perspective on he's kind of optimistic, world progression view. He's just a
Who
pedophile.
masturbates in the barbecue?
Yeah, yeah. So ridiculous.
And then we know a priori that only a socialist would have that desire.
All right, guys, I will call it now though. I need to get some food in me at this point. I rolled out of bed, got some monsters in my system, and just started chatting about this paper. So
Sick.
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. I'll text you guys in the chat, but for now, see
Cool.
you.
Cool. All
See
right.
ya.
See you guys.
I've started a new Instagram. You can find that by searching for the user name is Plato's Cave Podcast. That's all one word, no apostrophe in Plato's. You can find me as you could before on Twitter or X at Jordan_C_Myers. And my website, jordanmyers.org, is going to be updated shortly. It's a good way to sort of, I guess, either get in touch with me, you can contact me through there, or it's also a place that I'm going to trying to use to upload sort of recent work of mine that I'm in the process of developing.